The Holy Gospel according to Matthew.
Glory to you, Lord.
When Jesus saw the crowds, he went up the mountain, and after he sat down, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they will inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled. Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when people revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For in the same way they persecuted the prophets who were before you." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
Please be seated. Today is All Saints Sunday. It's not actually All Saints Day, that's November 1st, but it didn't fall on a Sunday. So with Reformation on October 31st and All Saints Day on November 1st, we sort of split them. But just what does that mean, All Saints Day? Well, the observance of All Saints began as a day to remember the lives of martyrs in the early persecution of the church. All those whose names were known, whose death dates were known, were remembered on the anniversary of their deaths. But there were so many who died, whose names weren't known, whose death dates weren't known. This meant they couldn't be included by name in any special prayers on the anniversary of their martyrdom. So the church created a specific day to pray for all of these unnamed saints. In the very early church, saints were a pretty big deal. In fact, they were so big a deal that as time moved on, people were taught to pray to saints instead of to God. This was one of the things that Martin Luther objected to in his arguments with the church at Rome, which is why those that the church had named as saints were pretty much ignored after the Protestant Reformation. This went on for some time. Today, in most Protestant churches, we've gone back to recognizing some of the official saints, individuals that went through the canonization process of the early church. We don't make a big fuss over them, but people like Anselm of Canterbury and Catherine of Siena can be included in our prayers during the year on the anniversary of their deaths. Perhaps more importantly, we've come to a new understanding of what a saint is. In the Protestant church, saints are people whose lives are a testament to the love of God. Along with the canonized saints of the early church, we recognize people like Bishop Oscar Romero of El Salvador, who was martyred in 1980. Onesimus Deseb, who was a Bible translator and evangelist. Florence Nightingale, who transformed the role of nurses. Rosa Parks, who sparked the civil rights movement when she refused to give up her seat on that Montgomery bus. These are ordinary people who have known, loved, and served God. Ordinary people, I'm having trouble with my mic, who have responded to God's grace in extraordinary ways. But the definition of a saint goes beyond even these ordinary people who did extraordinary things, because we too are saints. I think I told you this story before, but I'm going to tell you again. The first time I ever preached on All Saints Day was while I was in seminary. The pastor of my congregation, the one we attended while I was in school, gave me many, many opportunities to preach, especially during my third year. Holy Trinity had children, so there was, of course, a children's message. I sat down with the children on the steps of the altar, back when I could still get down and back up again. and ask, does anybody know what a saint is? I had a book full of pictures of the saints of the Catholic Church to show them, those icons that they do, the fancy pictures. And I also had some pictures I had taken of them and their families at a recent congregational event to help me explain that we are all saints. Well, my carefully planned message for the children went out the window because Kathleen, a precocious 6-year-old, had actually read the children's insert that came with the bulletin there already. And when I said, does anybody know what a saint is? She piped up with, a saint is someone who loves God. All I could say was, that's exactly right. We are all saints. And then I backpedaled and figured out something else to say. So who are the saints in your life? Who are the people who loved God and through that love taught you how to love God? Think for a moment about those who shaped your life, about those who may have led you to a life of faith. The people I've been thinking about lately are my godparents, Bob and Margaret Paulson. When I was 2 or 3, my family moved to one of those newfangled things called a housing tract. These newly created neighborhoods were the basis of that other newfangled thing called the suburbs. Back in the 50s, however, these new houses didn't come with a fence around your yard. You were on your own for that. What most people did was get together with their immediate neighbors, and if they wanted the same kind of fence, they would share the cost and the labor. It was also a very do-it-yourself time. You didn't hire a fencer, you built a fence. This was how we came to know the Paulsons, the family that lived behind us, whose backyard was right next to ours. I remember my dad and Bob Paulson working together to build the cinder block wall that would divide our backyards. They became good friends during that process, so they helped each other lay the cinder blocks around the rest of both yards. Our families also became good friends. They had 3 daughters. One, Mary, was about my age. Ruthie was my older brother Mike's age, and Esther was a few years older still. After a while, Bob and Margaret suggested that my brother and I, since we had such fun with the girls, might enjoy coming to Sunday school with them. So we did. Sometimes we would even stop at a little diner for sandwiches on the way home. Those were special days. My parents thought that having free time on Sunday mornings was great. And Bob and Margaret never pushed my parents about coming to church. I think they knew that Mike and I would come home each Sunday morning and tell them all about our morning at church. They knew that we would retell the Bible stories we had learned and proudly show off any art projects that had been created. They trusted that this would be enough. And it was. My parents eventually decided that they should probably come along some Sunday just to see firsthand what the folks at church were teaching their children. Shortly after that, my entire family was baptized, and Bob and Margaret Paulson became my godparents. The Paulsons are just 2 of the many saints who loved God, and through that love taught me how to love God. People who shaped my life of faith. So I ask you today, who are the saints in your life? Who are the people who have guided you and shaped you to be, as the precocious Kathleen said, someone who loves God? As I get older, I find that more and more of these saints, these individuals in my life, have died. They have, as one of my colleagues likes to put it, and I've borrowed this many times, claimed the promise of their baptism. But they are never really gone. The saints, these dearly departed ones, are present with us in our lives because they live on through our lives. Their influence helps us to continue to run the race of faith. And many believe that they are present with us here as we worship. You've heard reference to the great cloud of witnesses. There's a reason that so many altar rails, excuse me as I turn my back, go only halfway around. Because the other half is where the glorious saints of heaven gather with us as we kneel to receive the body and blood of Christ. They gather with us just as the saints of the Christian church all around the country gather on Sunday mornings with us in their own churches, but all of us together gathered with all the saints receiving the body and blood of Christ. The saints remind us that we live on the other side of death. As theologian Dorothy Soleil puts it, Christians are those whose death is already behind them. We're free to live in the victory scene that we heard this morning from Revelation 7 because death cannot touch us. Oh, it rears its ugly head from time to time. Cancer, Alzheimer's, domestic violence, hunger, the insanity of war. Death has not given up. But if you look at today's reading, and indeed the totality of Scripture, John the Revelator is saying, and Paul the Evangelist says over and over again, and Jesus the Christ is saying, the last enemy to be defeated is death. And death is already down for the count. Amen.